Thank you, Nick, and welcome everybody to this session on small supports, part of a series of sessions that are happening. And I saw some of the feedback from yesterday's, which looked amazing. So let's hope we have a really good session today. My name is Shona McFarlane. I'm the Deputy Director for Adults Health in Leeds. And no apologies for a slightly Leeds-focused session today with some of the participants that we have in the meeting today. So the agenda today, we're going to have an introduction from Nick in a few minutes around what are small supports. We'll then go into the Leeds experience with Steve and Vicky, a conversation with Kirsten about meaningful co-production, which has to be at the centre of everything that we do around small supports, and then a conversation about commissioning and moving into the end around success and challenges, with time, we hope, for questions from the audience. Small supports is a huge passion of mine. It has been for quite a long time. So I'm really, really pleased to be here today to introduce the session, but I'll hand over to Nick. Thank you, Nick.
Okay, so this is just a real quick recap, because it's always good just to remind ourselves what small supports are. I'm going to share a couple of slides, and then we're going to hear from a guy in Leeds who's going to be able to talk about his own experience. That's Mark. You're going to hear from Mark in a minute. I'm just going to move that across there, otherwise I'm going to be looking at two sides of the screen. You're going to hear from Mark in a minute, but I thought I'd just run through very briefly what small supports are and what they mean. These slides, which include some from Steve for later and Helen, will all be available afterwards, and we'll let you know how we're going to share them as a follow-on. So then the key thing is small supports have a long-term history. They come from the closure of Leeds Castle Institution for people with intellectual disabilities in the 1990s and early 2000s near Glasgow. And this is a photograph of Leeds Castle as is now. It's been left to go to ruin. And if people want to read more, there's a link there to a report that was published. It's chapter 5. You'll be able to find a detailed story about the closure. The idea about small supports came from the fact there were some people they were supporting to move out of Leeds Castle, and there wasn't the right appropriate community-based support, so they had to set out to develop something. So a number of people, including Simon Duffy and John Dalrymple and Francis Brown and the team, and Sam Smith, who some of you may well know, set up a new organisation called Inclusion Glasgow. They made a commitment to be small. When they got to the peak size, they set up Sea Change. So it's very much based on that model. And I think it's really important that people know that this isn't just a flash in the pan. This is sustainable, high quality support that's working very much in the same way that it was when it was set up, because it works for people. Core of the small support is the voice. It's the person, their loved ones, it's what works for them. People recognize good old-fashioned person-centered planning questions, but that's at the core of this. It's like, what really matters to you. In practical terms, that means when the director, because it's always the director of organizations, small support organizations, who's the first person to meet somebody they're going to support, sits down with them, they start to find out what their story is. Having done some planning with Doreen Kelly, it is very much that. Sometimes we even start pre-birth to find out how the family were before the baby was born. If we're lucky to get that sort of put in. Dave, who was online yesterday, Dave Barris from Positive Support for You, would say there's no compromise. And the moment we compromise on what works for somebody, what works and what they've said works and what their loved ones say works, is the moment we'll start to fail. And when we've got in mind people who've had very, very traumatic experiences in institutions, and more than likely in their early lives, find the world quite a challenging place to live as well, because they might have learning disabilities, because they're autistic. Any compromise is going to start that process of failure. Small supports are core is relationships. It's investing in relationships. Like I said, the director knowing every person who comes in. Everybody knows everybody in a small support. Hence, people are a lot safer. As soon as you start having people in organisations who don't know the people who are supported, is the moment those people are less safe. And we'd be saying that's a real standout quality of small supports, is that everybody knows each other, everybody's there to support each other. And small supports would say they're very much there about stickability, so they never walk away. There's no small support organisations that's given notice to anybody. The only person who's given notice to a small support organisation has been the person. So it's very much a long-term relationship that's based on shared interests, passions, and walking alongside somebody. We heard yesterday Sam talking about people who've worked alongside people for 10, 16 years in one case, which is a real kind of tribute to the support relationship between the person and the support worker. And that's one of the big qualities that we would be saying shines out. The last part of it is that it's a home of my own. So there's no residential care in small supports. It's ordinary homes. We kind of avoid core and cluster or congregate settings, and very much look to support people to have an ordinary home in an ordinary community. Other things that are key: commitment to stay small. The organisations we're working alongside or helping set up probably support 15, 20, 25 people maybe. Some of the ones that have been around for longer support slightly more, but basically it's that a complete commitment to staying small and staying local. Human rights, inclusion, being person-centred are the foundation stones. Person-centred plan, person-centred personal budget, personal support. It's very much linked to an individual approach to each of it and a very flat management structure, as I said. And this is the kind of work that Small Supports Programme does. I'd like to share Mark's video as a way of ending this, because it feels very much more powerful to actually hear from somebody in their own words. You will see Vicky as well starring in this video, but Vicky will be joining Steve later to talk a bit about unique support solutions.
I'm Mark, and I've been working with Unique Support Solutions for just over a year. But when Unique Support Solutions started working with me, I was still in hospital, so they've helped me move from hospital back into the community, which has helped me a great deal.
Mark had been in hospital for over 20 years, so it was really clear that there was a need to think differently and to look at a really bespoke and individual model of support that would benefit Mark. So that's where we identified unique support solutions.
Part of our strategy was to build a relationship very early doors, and we would talk about what his hopes and desires were. We talked about people that were important in his life, the location of where he lived. So we gathered all of that detail to know him really, really well. We said to Mark, we can't make a guarantee that nothing will go wrong. There will inevitably be bumps in the road, but what we can guarantee you is that we will be here, we will be by your side, we will listen, we will support you, we'll make sure we know what you want and your direction of travel, and we'll fix those things, we'll iron out those bumps in the road.
It's really important to support people as individually and as person-centred as possible. This gave Mark a real opportunity for a successful discharge. This approach will benefit other individuals like Mark who are finding the future quite daunting due to such a length of stay in hospital.
Unique Support Solutions has helped me surpass a lot of things that I didn't think I would have done when I was in hospital. I have staff who are willing to work with me and do numerous activities. I enjoy doing a bit of gardening, woodworking, magnet fishing, and spending time with family and my friends. Unique Support Solutions has helped me achieve the goals that I've been aiming for, and also has had a big impact on my life. I wouldn't be where I am today if it wasn't for them.
There's a phrase in there that every time I hear it speaks more than anything else I've ever heard from in that video, and it's I've got people who are willing to work with me. And I think it's really telling that Mark's experience of people who've been working with him in the past, it's not left him feeling that they're willing to work with him. They're just there because they have to be. And it says a lot about the organisation that's one of the things that he sees as really important, that people want to be there. And it's not just because they want lessons in magnet fishing, although I'm sure Vicky can answer questions about magnet fishing later. With that, and with Mark's words ringing, I will pass back to Shona, who can introduce the next bit.
Thank you, Nick. And before I bring Steve in, just to say that the work that we did with both the NDTI and also with Dave Barris, who you've just mentioned as our partner, was, I think, so significant in helping us on the journey. So it was that partnership, collaboration, working together, creating the vision and working towards that goal that was absolutely essential in everything that we did. But I will hand you over to Steve Bardsley, ex of Leeds City Council and now with NDTI. So over to you, Steve.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. So I'm Steve Bardsley, and on April the 31st, no, March the 31st, sorry, it's gone that quick, I retired from the council, obviously very early retirement, and I'm now associated with the National Development Team for Inclusion. I've been asked today to talk about what does it take to get a small support up and running. My role in Leeds City Council was the Joint Commissioning Manager for working age adults, but in particular learning disability services. And it was a joint commissioning role because we held a pool budget with the ICB, but the local authority was the lead commissioner for all learning disability services. So that sort of frames where I was coming from. So back in 2018, we were invited by the National Development Team, that's Leeds City Council and the ICB, to attend a seminar, a residential seminar on bespoke provision, it was called then. And it really ignited a sort of flame within me to want to do something different. Because yes, we had people who were in hospital who were struggling to get out. But in Leeds, like every other local authority, we had a lot of people who were bouncing around the same old services that we commissioned, and it just wasn't meeting their needs. I mean, don't get me wrong, a lot of the service we commissioned in Leeds were meeting the needs of adults with learning disabilities, but there was a small number of people who their needs were just not being met by the sort of more generic learning disability offer that we were doing. So we came back from that and we developed a very small project team. So there was myself from the local authority, and there was Debbie Walton, who was in that picture talking about Mark. And that was really the project team, but it was important because both partners, so the local authority and the ICB, were together, we were joined up, we had a joint vision. We also managed to recruit a project officer who was a sort of person who kept us all on track, made sure we read the emails we needed to, responded to things when we needed to, got the minutes of meetings out there to everybody. But that was our project team. So it was 3 people who all had their jobs, but they all had a belief that a small support offer was the right way. We shared the belief, and it's important to have a project team because it does take time to set up a small support service, or it did with us. And you need the 3 people to chivvy each other along, to support each other when one person's feeling like it's never going to happen, and really to have that commitment. So although people will have other jobs, they do need to have a strong commitment to delivering the project. The next step, which I think is always the most important step, was to develop the Leeds offer. What does a small support provision look like in Leeds? We heard from Nick the general principles of small support, and that's what we based our offer on. It was very pure. It was very true to all those principles Nick outlined before, and we put it down on paper and we developed it. And that's important because it sets your stall out. It sets your stall out as a local authority and an ICB about what you want to achieve, about the philosophy you want to work under, about the outcomes you want for people. But it also sets the stall out because it lets, when you recruit the small support provider, it lets them know what they can expect from you. So it's saying, here's the support we can offer, here's the training we can hook you into, and we're going to stand with you shoulder to shoulder throughout the length of this project. And I always describe it as a bit more of a mature commissioning role. And we didn't count hours, we just stood with the 2 small support providers that we got, and we worked with them all the time. And that was very clear. And the Leeds offer is also good because you can go back to your management team and it gives them something to evaluate you on, because you've set your stall out, you've said what you hope to achieve, and then you can update senior managers throughout the process. It's also a good idea, and I think Helen and I might talk about this later, is to talk about who the people are you're going to support. So we did have a list of people who were in hospitals in the dynamic risk register. Obviously, we were monitoring their discharge plans, their discharge process. But as I've said earlier, we also had a number of people who, quite frankly, we were failing because we were offering the same offer to them and it just wasn't meeting their needs. And there was only two things happening when that occurs. Is one, people's outcomes aren't being met and the situation gets worse. But adversely, the cost to the authority goes up because each time a placement fails, it costs more to find an alternative placement because they've had a label of a failed placement before that. So it was just bonkers not to try something different in my mind. And it wasn't, as Nick said, I think earlier, people see individual support as being a lot more expensive. And I think the Leeds experience has proved it hasn't been. And I would argue you can't not afford to try something different, first and foremost for the sake of the individuals you're working for and trying to create, better outcomes for them, but also for the budgetary constraints that every local authority up and down the country is looking at. What we were throwing money at before wasn't working, so let's bite the bullet and try something different. So armed with our Leeds offer, we went to our senior management team, who was Catherine and Shona at the time. And, it wouldn't have happened if it wasn't for those two people. They really championed it. So Shona said earlier, she's got a strong belief in small support and individualized support. And it was really pushing it an open door. So we were quite lucky. We presented the Leeds offer to the senior management team, who was also made up of finance chief officers who had a bit more interest and wanted to know that the money would stack up. But really, we got the green light. And where it also meant we were able to do is say, how often do you want us to come back and report to you? What reviews do you want to take place? When can we update you? And it was left to sort of every 6 months, although I did get other meetings in between because I wanted to update senior managers on how we were doing, maybe ask their help, if there was things that weren't going quite as well, and help them and get them to help us unblock some of the blockages that we created or came up against. But it really meant that it was always on their agenda, it was always on their page, and they knew what was happening. The next thing we did as the project team was identify key partners. And that's from, it's looking at who you need to get on board, who you need to sell it to. And that can be anything from finance colleagues to procurement colleagues, support worker staff, community health teams, GPs. Get your lead GP for learning disability services in your area, talk to them about what you can be. So really identify people and key people who can help you set the small support scheme up, but also can help unblock any blockages that you will come across during the way. Another key partner is obviously housing. So it's about understanding who your housing providers are. Are there any other local or near local housing providers you can contact and talk to about what small supports is? And obviously, another key partner is social work teams. That's where the referrals are going to come from. It's about talking to teams. It's also about going out to service providers, because as Vicky will testify later, it was when we presented to learning disability service providers in Leeds that we got Vicky and Louisa, who are Unique Support Solutions, from that initial contact. So you never know where the people are going to come from. Moving on to the next bit, and that's sort of going in with key partners. It's about promotion, and don't be ashamed to shout it from the rooftops. Think where you can get a presence in team meetings and provider meetings and carers meetings. And that's very important. Talk to carers, because there'll be some carers in those meetings who think my son or daughter hasn't been served well by the offer that's on the table at the minute. And then they will become an advocate on behalf of you for a small support solution for their person. So really promote it. The one thing we didn't do very well, which is probably because of my ignorance, was use social media. And I think you could probably reach a lot more people than we were able to. So the Leeds Small Support Scheme really ran from 2018, when we were first introduced to the idea, to 2025, when the the 2-year pilot ended. Obviously, we had COVID in between all that, so it was postponed for a bit. But we started the pilot when Vicky, when USS and M&M, who are the other small support provider that we grew and developed, took their first referrals. So it was the 2 years of operation. You then need to decide how you're going to procure it. So we had a very strong link with Nigel, who was our procurement support officer. And at first he was, no, you've got to get a framework. You've got to do it as a framework. And we're like, we don't really want to do it. We want to go through choice and control like we did with all other learning disability services, and let the individual choose what kind of service they wanted, what kind of home they wanted. So finally we persuaded him it was a good idea. And he was the one who came up with a 2-year pilot, was a way around getting some of the procurement rules that we were trying to sort of circumvent, I suppose. So it was a 2-year pilot. We put out the Leeds offer on your tender, and we invited applicants to apply for that. And we did just a normal selection process based on your tender. So we evaluated the answers we got back. We ended up with 4 potential small support organisations. So we had what would become USS, Vicky and Louisa, and we also had May and Mitchell, Alex and Denver, who we ended up with. And we had 2 others who didn't quite fit the brief because they were already organisations and they were going to set up a small support arm of their existing organisation. Excuse me. And what we got with Vicky and Louisa, Alex and Denver, was that we had professional practitioners. Vicky and Louisa were senior managers within a larger learning disability organisation, national organisation. And Denver and Alex were working in children's services at the time. And we had people who were prepared to give up the jobs that they had for many years and take this big step with us at the same time. So we rejected 2 of the people very politely, but said it's not quite what we want. It's going back to the Leeds offer. It was a very pure offer. We knew exactly what we wanted to deliver. Did we want more than 2 providers? Probably yes. I sort of had 3, 4 or 5 in my head. Looking back on it, I think 2 is the perfect number because, as we'll get into in a minute about becoming operational, although we had a number of referrals sort of lined up, or what we thought was lined up, a lot of them didn't materialise for a number of different reasons. And you've really got to have enough people to get 2 fledgling organisations up and running and self-sufficient as quickly as possible. And we calculated that it took 3 referrals each to enable that to happen. So we needed to get both organisations up to 3 referrals in operation as quickly as possible at the same time. So we weren't, we didn't have 2 with one and none with the other. So we as a project team triaged the referrals that were sent to us, and we rejected some. And we learned a lot about this because, as Vicky will say, USS worked with one individual for a lot of months without it materialising into a support. And we learned we had to really, in order to support the new organisations, we had to triage them and make sure that when we put a referral to them, it was a real referral that had, a very high chance of going forward. Vicky, that's a sort of run around of where we got to before we met. Well, we'd known each other a lot of years before that, as I've said. But is there anything you want to add to that, or we can go on to the next slide about how our relationship developed once you became operational?
Yeah, no, I think that was a really good summary, Steve. Yeah.
Okay, if we get the so now we're on to the small supports in operation. So I'll just start off with developing the relationships. So we had a small project team. We had 2 fledgling providers who not only were they setting up their own organisation and all the things that entails, and making sure they did the due diligence that we as a local authority, needed and had to have. So we needed references, we need to see policies and procedures, we need to see all the things that you'd expect before you start doing business with an organisation. But what we wanted from the start was a different commissioning relationship. And I've said before, I wanted a sort of more grown-up relationship. I wanted something that both organisations could come to me at any one time, or come to Debbie or the project team at any one time, and we would together sort out the problem. If it was a problem, we'd celebrate the positives. If it was a positive. So from day one, for the 2-year pilot, we set up monthly meetings with both organisations, and sort of every 2 or 3 months we would meet with you together, wouldn't we? And we also did a few training programs. We got a real high philosophy training program, didn't we, with Trish Nichols, where we were all together in a church hall and explored what a small support provider is, what we wanted, and to make sure we were all on point, which obviously we were. I don't know if you wanted to come in there, Vicky, about relationships.
Absolutely. Without that kind of, I think I've always said all the way along that having that buy-in from the local authority and that commitment and that relationship has really helped as we kind of inevitably come across barriers, hurdles. We were very much the unknown to people. So to be able to kind of reach out to yourselves, and also to have the mentors as Dave, that's
Yeah, you just broke up a bit there at my end. I don't know if it is my end or if other people heard you, Vicky, but it was, and Dave was a big point, wasn't it? So the other thing I would say is have a mentor, both for the small support organisations. Dave is somebody who runs his own small support organisation, and very, very effectively created some great outcomes for individuals that hadn't had great outcomes previously. But he also helped us as a local authority and an ICB develop the offer to help us unpick problems from a provider point of view that he could see would happen. He helped identify funding streams or pots of money that providers could apply for. Because the other thing we didn't have in Leeds, and we didn't have any startup monies. So although Shona and Kath were very, very supportive of us going ahead, there wasn't any money to get it going. But we did manage to get 3 grants, I think it was in the end, from NHS England, which we largely passported on to USS and M&M at the point going through COVID when things were really bad, and just to keep things ticking over. And it wasn't a large amount of money, but I think it was welcome at the time, and it was just enough to help things, get over. Contract management, what we did was we secured one contract manager to oversee both organisations, and it was somebody who was wedded to the small support ethos. And I think that was useful. So he met you on a monthly basis again, which isn't normal contract management, but again, it was more of a sort of quality assurance and a support. Moving into quality assurance, it's about involving families, about involving the individual. And do you want to come in on some of the positives that we've done, Vicky, especially with Mark and other people you support?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, we can all, I know that kind of pounds and pence mean a lot to local authorities as well, but it is that kind of quality of life for people. But using Mark, fortunately, I invited him today, but today is at work today, which is great. But just to use Mark as an example, he had 20 years, so his entire adult life in a secure setting 24/7. And at the moment, he's supported with 5 hours a day, which we use kind of quite flexibly depending on what he's doing with his week. You can see from the video that we plan where and how he has his staff support. And just he had some amazing news last month that he managed to get an absolute discharge, which is something that is really rare. So he was kind of discharged on kind of a conditional discharge, which was kind of hanging over him, but for in less than, well, it's sort of less than 2 years, he's had that lifted because he's absolutely thrived, and the life that he lives with his job and his kind of girlfriend staying over every other weekend, and friends and work, it's just incomparable to the fact that he spent his entire adult life in a secure setting from 18 to 38, and how much, aside from the kind of value, how much money that would have cost compared to how much that costs now. Yeah, it's definitely kind of, it's about, from our perspective, as Steve said, we heard it from, we went to the provider forum, and kind of it was sold to us that way, really, is that it was, you know, maybe you work already for a big provider that you feel like they've lost the way, and it's, you're doing things that make you feel like this isn't why you came to this line of work. I mean, you know, nobody comes to work in a care environment because they want to make lots of money. They do it because they're passionate about kind of making sure people have good lives. So that certainly tapped on into us. I think it definitely came with its challenges, and we had to be resilient, but being passionate about why you would want to do this is key. But having that support network, surrounded by support networks, really, apart from obviously yourself, Steve, and the local authority, and Dave as a mentor, we've got like a small supports network. So it's just being able to reach out to people. You know, there's, whenever you have got a barrier, it's not actually a barrier, it's just a hurdle, and there are people around you who can help you overcome those hurdles. And you know, it's not about reinventing the wheel. There are, as Nick said earlier, there are people who've been doing this for a long time, and they are so willing and so supportive because people are passionate about small supports and making sure that that kind of expands and grows, which is great. So probably some of our biggest barriers really are, I think this is something else that possibly Nick touched on, is helping the people that we are currently working with understand that actually the battle is kind of gone, that we are there to support, because they've had learnt experiences over the years that for me to get what I need, or to achieve what I want to achieve, I have to battle with somebody to get this. And actually we constantly remind people, say, well, that's okay, we're not here to argue that. How can we enable that? What do we need? Let's make a plan. And that kind of just takes the wind out of people's sails, and takes a long time for people to get over that. Like, right, that's it, I'm going to come. You don't need to complain, you just need to say, can I change something? And the answer is yes. And so that's kind of been one of our barriers. But yeah, having that support network around you, you're just not alone, really. Everybody's buying into the same kind of outcomes.
Sorry, Nick. Just one final thing is in terms of promoting the positives, we had an evaluation done by the NDTI at the end of the 2-year pilot. That is out there. I think hopefully most people have seen it already, but it did prove that we created, you know, extremely positive outcomes for the 10 individuals who were being supported up till March 25, and it did deliver £200,000 over the 2 years of saving to the ICB and the local authority across all 10 people. So some of those people, it might have cost more, but other people, as you've heard, like Mark, their support level reduced considerably very quickly. So it is a good thing to do. It's a hard thing. You've got to roll your sleeves up and dig deep and keep on at it, but it is a very worthwhile thing to do. Thanks, Nick.
Thanks, Steve. Really brilliant to hear what you and Vicky were saying there about vision and also purpose. And fabulous to hear that Mark has gone on since that video, really, to go on and develop and do more things that he wants to do, which is absolutely brilliant. Steve, you may have underplayed the procurement journey a little bit, as I remember that being quite a challenge at the time. But shall we move on then to the next item, given that we're behind time? And we're going to talk about something that's absolutely fundamental to small supports, which is about meaningful co-production. So do we have Kirsten, Nick, or shall I hand over to you?
Yeah. Thanks, Kirsten. No, you're kind of leaping out of one load of training, probably lecturing people on human rights and good things. So you're very welcome. I mean, there's two reasons. One, to invite you along because you've got first-hand experience of small supports in Newcastle and sport for your son, but also because that experience is the best way of shaping up what real co-production is in terms of involvement. Do you briefly just want to share a little bit about your own and your son's experience?
Absolutely. Thanks, Nick. So, for those of you that don't know me, my son Tom is autistic. And when he was 14, he went into a mental health hospital after a violent incident at home. He rapidly deteriorated, ending up in every level of security through the system until finally ending up in a medium secure hospital. He was labelled with a hefty reputation. Really struggled. He was one of 20 children in the country subject to the highest levels of restricted practice right across the board. His human rights were abused on many occasions, which is now why I specialise in human rights and train professionals in how to avoid inhuman and degrading treatment a lot of the time. So we found ourselves in medium secure hospital really with very little hope for the future. Everything that was written about him was as a dangerous individual. I'd had over 14 years battled with the system, gone through massive bouts of parent blame, had to prove that I wasn't an abuser, that I was a loving parent. We were both really very traumatized by our experiences of asking for and receiving care on every level. And finally, we were at what we feel like is the end of the road. There's a risk that my son would lose complete hope, become totally institutionalized, and not really have a vision of a safe and happy life beyond hospital. Because it was so difficult to find the right place for him, because of all of these labels, then he was on a delayed discharge. And there was such a big risk that we wouldn't be able to turn this around. My local council had absolutely nothing to offer him on their framework. They just don't deal with people who don't fit inside a neat box, which is absolutely my son. So they tried to send him to a locked children's home 200 miles away, which I fought and fought and fought against. Luckily, I met Nick at an event and he told me about a wonderful organisation called Orbis in Newcastle. Some of you might know Nigel Devine. He is absolutely my god and my hero. So I got in touch with him, and really from the first, I saw what a major difference to anyone I'd ever dealt with before when talking about my son. For a start, he wasn't interested in reading all the things written about Tom. He wanted to meet me first and foremost. He wasn't afraid of a parent. He didn't avoid a parent. He saw, well, of course I want to get to know you. You know everything there is to know about Tom, which was a massive, refreshing change. He never referred to me as mum, which was wonderful. I had an identity. So yeah, he and I spent a lot more time together than I was expecting. He really put himself out there. It wasn't just sort of one or two scheduled meetings. It was like he gave me his actual mobile phone number. He wanted to know what was happening with Tom. He didn't expect to just be able to show up at the hospital and talk to Tom and Tom respond to that. He was like, no, this is going to take some time. I want to know everything I can from you first, and then what is going to make him most comfortable if he's going to meet me? What are the things that he enjoys? When's his downtime? What are the things that wind him up? And right from the start, he just had this natural curiosity about both of us, what had led to us being there, but also who Tom was as a person. What were the things that made him tick? What were the funny things about him? Because I think from first meeting Tom, Nigel said he is the funniest guy I've ever met. He's got this dark sense of humor, but he really got it, and he wasn't afraid. He didn't talk to him like a professional. So that was a completely refreshing approach. But also the way he was kind of always present, not like in your face, but he was always there. He was always someone you could call on. He was always like being up to date. He spoke to the art teacher because art was Tom's thing. We were talking about college, about where he could go. He even came on a visit to a college with us when Tom was still in hospital. And all of this felt like we were getting a vision of Tom that was new, that was different from all of the terrible things that had been written about him. And I think for me, it felt like for the first time, I actually had an ally in my battles. That co-production to me, it was for the first time feeling like I was really an important part of the team. That I'd been asked my opinions in the past, but as soon as it differed from the professionals, I was basically, slapped down, accused of being difficult. Um, but I knew the vision that Tom had for himself, and I had to fight to get it. And what was wonderful about Nigel was that was his priority too. He was, even going into bat with professionals, he helped me fight to prevent him from being sent to this place. He helped me find a place, a privately rented flat, because the local authority couldn't and wouldn't provide accommodation. He involved Tom in interviewing staff who might be the right people to support him, recognizing that, Tom would be an amazingly funny, great guy to get along with if you got along with him, but if you didn't, he didn't want you anywhere near his space. Also understanding the amount of trauma that Tom had been through and the fact that coming out of hospital would probably be a really, really challenging time for him. I remember being absolutely terrified the first couple of nights Tom was at home. I was so happy to have him home, and he was so happy to be home. But we were both scared, and he started to self-harm. And I remember, Nigel saying, look, you can call me 1 o'clock in the morning, whatever it takes to talk through this. And it was a case of, should I take him to A&E? Should I not? I don't want to push the red button. I want to give him time and space, but I'm alone here and I'm really terrified. And he sat on the phone with me and talked me through this. And he came and saw Tom and he talked him through this. And we talked about how it was okay to be scared, but that it didn't mean that, we had to hit the panic button. It was all part of the process. And apart from that, I think all of the staff that he chose, the way he managed that staff, he was always part of the deal. He would always take a shift. He would always be there, and he would always negotiate, for example, because of this hefty reputation, the local authority wanted to put in really restrictive care package, and me and Nigel both fighting with them to say, no, that's going to give you the opposite of what you want. If you go in treating him like a criminal, treating him like a dangerous monster, that's the way he will act. And that is not what you want. Step back, have the opportunity to step in, but step back. Let him have some freedom, let him live some life. Let him have some responsibility to make decisions, even if they're bad decisions, as long as he's safe. Don't, he's out of hospital. Don't make it hospital at home. And having people like Nigel who would, and the other staff members as well, who will go to bat, who will fight for your son's rights, as well as, talking about a package and finance and not getting paid for months on end, but not withdrawing the service. All sorts of things. I mean, I couldn't speak highly enough for Orbis and how they transitioned Tom out of hospital, because I think it could have gone really, really badly. And I would say I would credit them with saving his life, to be honest with you, because that approach, I think, would be the only thing that would allow him to see a future beyond the terrible things he'd experienced.
It's almost like I don't need to ask what meaningful co-production is, because you kind of demonstrated it really in explaining how real co-production is doing what Orbis, in this case, the small support, and Nigel did for your son. But I think that I just remember we had an online session, I think it was last September, and it was called Meaningful Co-Production with Kirsten and Charlie. And it was like both of you kind of stepped away from talking about the kind of strategic thing that there's so many questions about whether it's real or not. And you talked about this is where co-production counts. This is where it counts because it's about people's lives. And you see the impact of listening, but you also see the impact of not listening. So, I mean, have you got anything that can sum that up? I'm aware that we're sliding on time, but if I say what's meaningful co-production, how would you sum it up from your own experience, Kirsten?
I think I would take it back to human rights, actually, and I would say that, having just come off teaching people about human rights, is that our autonomy and the way we experience the world, our choices, all of those things that make us who we are, the risk of having that taken away from you, being a vulnerable person in society and having to rely on others to provide you with things to live that you can't provide yourself, that makes you so vulnerable. And that relationship with the state is so important, because if you get that wrong, you can destroy someone's life and destroy lots of other people's lives around them. If you get that wrong, you humiliate them, you dehumanize them, you institutionalize them. And they can be simple, simple little things. But if you forget the person, if you forget their voice, if you stop listening, if you forget to ask, and if you don't act on it, then it's like, you protect the right to someone's life. What about the protect to want to live? And that, to me, is essentially what meaningful co-production is. It's my life. I need to direct my life. I need to be listened. I need to believe that I, as an individual, am a worthwhile human being and have some power and control over how I live. If you forget that, then what's the point? What is the point? If that person is not having a voice, central, directing their own lives in the most meaningful way they can, why bother going to all of the expense?
I think I'm going to pinch a few quotes from that last bit there, Kirsten. I just feel like that was really powerfully made. I can't better it. I'll pass back to Shona.
Thank you, Nick, and also thank you, Kirsten, for that excellent summary, really, of how small supports work. It took me back to the principles of small supports and how sticking and adhering to that is so important in the way in which you develop the relationship with people, but also that listening to people. And it took me back to the observation about what Mark said as well, which was people willing to work with me. And people wanting to work with me and people wanting me to have a life. So I think those principles need to stay hard, fast and stuck to every wall. So thank you for that excellent session. It's now, I think, time to talk about commissioning and the basics around commissioning. And I'll bring in Helen. It's lovely to see you again, Helen. But, please come in and take the next section. Thank you.
Fabulous. Thanks, Shona. It's lovely to see you and everybody else, friends old and new here. It's great. Okay, we've got a few slides. I'll try and be quick because I'm conscious of time, really, but probably really a bit of a summary, I think, of what Steve and others have talked about, really. And, it's important that we sort of have a look at these areas one by one. And I think these were just some of the key headlines for me, reflecting upon the work that I'd done, particularly in Devon and the Southwest, around developing small supports and reflecting on planning, commissioning and funding. So my sort of takeaways from this was, if possible, really, as a commissioner, trying to do something new in a system that may not be designed around what you want to do, is try and get a champion, try and get somebody, more senior to you, who can act as somebody to give you a bit of headroom to progress what you need to do, and sometimes also maybe a little bit of a tin helmet as well, because you're asking people to do things very, very different. If we always do what we've always done, we'll always get what we've always got. So systems and processes can really constrain what you need to do, and sometimes we need to challenge those to deliver small supports. So that was really important, and I was lucky enough to have a lot of support from key managers, within the area that I worked on. And the next thing was really think about local demand. Who would benefit from small supports? And when we were developing it, we had a lot of people that had been placed in hospitals out of area. We were recognising, the distress of families, particularly about that situation, and also very high profile cases really around safeguarding that came up, around abuse. And of course we had Winterbourne View, but there were also other areas, that were not working for people. And absolutely, as Kirsten said, affecting people's human rights. So think about those individuals, and you can look in, obviously, Steve mentioned the dynamic support register, but there will be people, particularly you might have people stepping down from prison. There may also be people in the community who are struggling, and you also may be thinking about young people coming through from children's services as well, who are going to need a much more bespoke type of support. So thinking about that, and also getting to know those people. For the people that we worked with around small supports, we also develop life plans with those people. So really getting to know them, understanding what made them tick and what would work for them. And then that translated into a service design, if you like. So that was really important for me as a commissioner to understand what was needed on an individual level, but also strategic level. So and then think about timescales. You know, when would you expect this to be live? You know, what's the aim? And you've got to be really realistic around that. And then look at working backwards to now, you know, so if I want this to happen in 18 months' time, what do I need to do? And some very basic project management skills are useful, I think, such as developing key milestones and considering who, when and where key decisions are made as well. And, you know, having that mandate is really, really important, but there may be other things in your journey that you need to affect to enable this to happen. And Steve mentioned, you know, feeding back to senior managers, having those structures and systems in place. And understanding what tasks are dependent on other tasks, you know, so you have to think about, well, what do I do first here? You know, how do I order my activity so that it makes sense, so that I'm not wasting time, you know, that I'm not duplicating things, but some activities I might be able to overlap as well. So just thinking about timescales. And then the other thing was about allowing for flexibility. One of the things that's quite interesting is that sometimes people don't plan well enough at all, or they overplan. And you've got to sort of have a sweet spot really between that sort of strategic plan that gives you a framework, but then also deal with emergent things that come up as you're doing it. And people always say strategy walks on 2 feet, planned and emergent. So you've got to have that flexibility really around that. So you can't overplan it to the nth degree because that won't work. And obviously you do need some plans. And then obviously picking up on what Kirsten said as well, co-produce wherever possible, keep it real. I mean, particularly around individuals, that's absolutely necessary. But also, you know, just checking back sometimes and saying, you know, does this feel right to you? Is this working okay for you? And I did rely upon formal communication methods, but also informal feedback was really important to me. So just checking back with people, and I did have good relationships, talking about again, with people, families, advocates as well. So I could just check and say, you know, how's it going, and just checking it out and being clear where those referrals will come from as well. There's no point setting up provision if you haven't made sure the operational side of the services are ready to understand what it's all about and to see how those referrals and support can be put in place. So that was very much sort of like a rush through the planning element. So commissioning, obviously, you're keeping the person at the centre, absolutely critical. And where possible, try and keep it simple. Sometimes I just feel that we can overcomplicate things. And there is a link between how you're going to fund, I'm going to talk about that in a minute, and how you commission and what you commission. So that's important to acknowledge, really. You know, you don't want to have it, you know, too complicated, and be realistic as well about growth over time. When I did the work, particularly with Beyond Limits, we were really clear about what a new organisation could manage in terms of the numbers of people that they could support effectively. And there needs to be a really strong focus on the person. So you can't be saying, oh, well, you're going to have 5 people in the first 6 months and 5 people in the next 6 months, because that's not going to work well. You've got to listen to what the capacity is like within the organisation that are supporting individuals. And in terms of small support more generally, do communicate your intentions internally and externally about what's happening around small support. So you can use things like market position statements and things like that for your wider community. But more than that, you need to think about a communications plan. So for each of your audiences or the groups of people that you want to speak to, your message is going to be slightly different. So, for example, if you're working with a multidisciplinary team that you partly commission in the community, you might want to tell them about the new small supports provider and set the expectation about how they're going to work alongside them. But then that might be very different to going to carers, for example, or letting them know what's happening around that. And also internally within your organisation, contracts, procurement, senior managers. So develop a communications plan, thinking about audience, message and method. Steve mentioned social media before, and certainly within the programme, we've done quite a lot of work around making sure that we're familiarising people with this programme of work, but locally you can do that too. And I think people have developed amazing things like animations to get message across. But remember, audience, message and method is really critical. How you want to fund the support is important. I'll come on to that in a second because that will impact on how you contract. We've heard a lot about building relationships, and that's really key to what we're doing. It's very different. You can't sort of say, by the way, here's your contract, get on with it. That isn't the approach at all. It's much, much more hands-on. And what you're trying to do is create cultures focused on resolution. And it's interesting because I heard Vicky talk about bumps in the road, and I think you've really got to expect it. We're dealing with decades sometimes of people having horrible experiences, and you will have those bumps in the road, and you need to support the providers to be able to move with that. And certainly beyond limits, Doreen will say that I was a human bulldozer. So when problems came up, sometimes I had to go and iron those out to enable this process to unfold naturally. But all the time I was conscious about getting rid of the barriers so that we could put this in place. And I always felt that it was my job to create the right conditions for this to thrive. So that was really important in terms of the commissioning role. And also, I was really wary about existing processes and people saying, oh, you've got to do this thing or you've got to do that thing because that's the way that we do it here. Now, sometimes that might kill some of the fundamental principles that you're trying to deliver and the type of service you want to provide through a small supports organisation. So you've got to be able to challenge that and defend and argue for your case really around that. And I used to argue the case for doing things differently in three ways really. One was about the facts, is this realistically going to work and what does our experience tell us? The other one was about on values, and the other one was on legalities as well, because don't forget that people have had their liberty taken away from them. They've had this of often degrading and inhuman treatment. And also, don't forget, under the Care Act, we have a duty of prevention as well. So if we're knowingly putting individuals into services that are going to harm them or not meet their needs, then we're not fulfilling our legal responsibilities as well. And I would have well-rehearsed arguments to sort of fuel my bulldozer, my inner bulldozer, if you like, to say, no, we need to do something different because if we do this, we can't do what's right for the person. So keeping that human rights focus as our North Star is critical. And certainly Sam, from Scotland, who works on our programme, often says that, but it's something that is important. And Kirsten was reiterating that in her work. But it's a useful tool for you as a commissioner to check out, and also other legal frameworks too, to say, look, if we don't do this, we're not acting legally. The other thing was about to support new providers to maintain that stickability. I think that, there is going to be some of those issues. And it was just great to hear Kirsten's story about that situation in the middle of the night where Nigel phoned her up and was there for her. And similarly, as a commissioner, if things are going to go awry, and they do sometimes, your role is not to blame. Your role is to actually get out of that drama triangle and say, how do we create our way out of this? How do we resolve those problems and those issues? And think about that really as your role to support that stickability. So no blame, but support. And that is really, really important. So that, I think, was a commissioning role. I think that's in a nutshell. So finally, just quickly on funding, I would say keep it as simple as possible. I mean, we use individual service funds, which were really important. And you will know what your clear local funding agreements are around things like Section 117 funding. And it's good to understand what your whole environment is around that locally. The other thing about budget management as well was that it's a really good principle in budget management, just generally in terms of management theory, to push the decision making about spending as close to the person or the grassroots as possible. And that's really important because one, you get real-time control. Two, you get you know that money's being spent wisely and it's being utilized pragmatically. And three, I think it just feels like people have better knowledge about how to spend that money than you do. You know, so the important thing is to really have that framework at a local level to support that. And obviously you're doing your contract monitoring and all of those things and checking where the money's gone. But you know, a parent will know, actually, we're wasting money on mobile phone contracts. We only need one phone to pass between staff. So that was a really good example for me about how the money was being used well and we were getting greater value for money. In terms of that internal selling, we have a lot of evidence now as part of the Small Supports programme to show some of the savings, but don't overpromise. People's needs are often likely to go up initially. And what I have seen is over time it has come down, but you can't overpromise on that. You don't know that. We don't have a crystal ball. We know generally it does, but for individuals, it's important to be clear about the money, particularly when you're working with finance colleagues. And the other one I would say is bringing as many streams of funding as possible to support the person and their accommodation. So we use, for example, NHS England capital grants to pay for deposits for shared ownership schemes. And rather than buying a couple of properties, I could buy 10 by doing that. Also maximising people's benefits to cover, you know, their own living costs. That was important, you know, and also there may be other bits and pieces of grant funding or charitable funding that might be available locally. So really do look at that. It's important. Pay your support people on time. We've seen horrible or heard horror stories about people being months and months delayed and having to pay staff using their credit cards, which is just disgusting. And I think that's important. And also make those reasonable adjustments for small new providers. They won't have millions of pounds in the bank like American hedge funded companies. They're small, they're local, they're new. And think about that. So again, that's another way that you can maybe adjust systems and processes locally to support the development of new providers. So they're the things that I would say are the key things really around those areas. Thanks.
Thank you, Helen. That was excellent. And I'm just trying to wonder how we get a commissioner who is both flexible and a bulldozer. So I'm going to ponder on that for a minute. I think you also described some of the aspects about being very, very practical and also very tenacious. And I think that came through, and it's come through in a number of the presentations today. So thank you very much for that. Back to Nick. Nick, for successes of the last session.
I guess rather than carrying on a conversation, it would be really great to hear from the floor, Shona. I mean, I do have a question to kick that off, and it's really turning it back to you, and maybe with a bit from Steve, and maybe with a bit from Bill, who worked alongside you as well in the early days in Leeds. But it's just your reflections on. I think Helen called herself, so you don't need to take the term of being a bulldozer. But what did it take as a leader to make it happen?
From our perspective, probably vision, clarity and tenacity. So from a vision perspective, Small Supports fitted perfectly with our ambition to be a strengths-based and asset-based social work and social care service in Leeds. And we've done some amazing work with the NDTI early in 2017 to really revolutionise the way that we did social work. And those values, we had the aspiration to push right the way through the whole of the organisation, including into commissioning. So when Steve came back with a glint in his eye about Small Supports, it was a huge pleasure for me to grab hold of that and think, yes, this is one of the ways in which we can prosecute that vision through commissioning as well as through social work and social care delivery. So having that vision around strengths and asset-based approaches, and Kirsten talked about the team around his son and having that ability to look at the strengths and the assets and what he brought to the situation is exactly where we need to start. From another perspective, clarity of purpose. So really understanding what it is that we were trying to achieve and sticking to that vision. So not allowing any of this to be taken off track through some of the commissioning challenges, some of the procurement challenges that we had. would have taken us down the wrong road in respect of this, but it was like, no, we're sticking to the knitting. We are going to stick to the clarity of purpose. Small supports helped by having that very clear, you know, the principles of small supports, so don't deviate from there. Trust was part of it as well, having trust, both that it was the right thing to do, but also trusting the team, Steve and others who were working on this, to know that they wouldn't let anything go that wasn't right, but also that they would work with the new providers in a way that meant that we had the best outcomes for the people at heart, because that was what we were there for, was ultimately the people of Leeds, the people who had been excluded from Leeds for so long because of their hefty reputations, and bringing those people back to home, and then seeing the outcomes, which was, you know, the passion behind it is seeing people thrive in a new environment. So I guess those are my leadership tips. Steve made it easy by bringing regular reports, which gave me an opportunity to say yes in a way that meant that nobody else could say no. And sometimes you need to do that, don't you? So that was one of the things that I contributed, was, yeah, of course we're doing this. Yes, of course we're going to support Steve. Yes, of course it's a challenge, but we'll get there. So, so I think those are the three things really: vision, clarity, and trust.
Go for it, Bill.
Can I jump in with a question? A question for you, Shona.
You can.
We're all in this call, and people who listen to the recording afterwards. We're here because we care passionately about people with those big reputations, and we understand their histories. But what we keep hearing in lots of other areas is this is a tiny group of people. You in Leeds, you have hundreds of thousands of people to think about, but you thought about this group of people, and you battled for and protected the project over a number of years. So I think I have two questions. Why was this important to you? And I think the other one is, when you then had to evidence to other people, to elected members, to other senior managers, why it worked, which were the bits of evidence that were most useful to you?
The first question is a very personal one, I think, or at least that's the way I'll answer it, which is my commitment over my career, really, to supporting people with a learning disability to have a gloriously ordinary life, or just an ordinary life in some cases. But that's been my passion, that's been my commitment, and wanting a good life for everybody, but also knowing that, I think it comes back to the human rights conversation, actually, knowing that people had been deprived of their rights for so long, sometimes on the basis of a very small piece of information that gave them a hefty reputation. I worked with somebody years ago who'd been away for a long time on the basis that they had a label of arson. And actually what had happened was they were living in a shared flat, and they'd set fire to some toast. No, they'd left toast under the grill and it had gone on fire. And who hasn't done that? But for some reason they'd had to go away for that, and then they stayed away because people had that reputation. So finding a way to get past those hefty reputations is really, really important. And for me, it's just that passion of it was like, I suppose as somebody in my position, I'm not a huge fan of services. You'll remember, Bill, when we were doing the day service modernisation, I was often heard muttering, people need a day service like they need a hole in the head. And it was that kind of, you know, what do people need to live a good life? It's not a service, it's an opportunity, it's people who love them. So that was what kept me going. It's kept me going a lot of the time. Second question about members, you have to shift into things like, this is going to deliver savings. This is going to achieve targets. So it's transforming care target. We had a lot of people in Leeds who were on the transforming care list. We've got all of those people that were on the original list back home. So it was that sort of aspiration for us as a city to be supportive of individuals to come back home. And then also it was sort of, we're leading in this space as a city. So you cue into the things that members value, and they value for money, and they value our reputation as a city and doing things right and doing things well. So in a lot of ways, it was quite an easy one to sell in that way.
Thank you. That's really useful. And I think it's something that I think we often don't reflect on enough, that our role as people who are trying to develop things is also sometimes to understand and support the radical thoughts that are actually going on in senior managers' heads as well. That just because somebody is looking after budgets and looking after local authorities, it doesn't mean then that they're not actually looking for radical things as well.
Absolutely. So I heard from Doreen ages ago at NCAS or somewhere talking about Beyond Limits, and it sparked an absolute passion in me for this is possible. And then talking to Nick the other week about how other people are developing small supports in different ways has stimulated me to think about there are different ways of doing it with different groups of people. So I'm now thinking about how do we adapt the idea in different concepts. So
Thank you. That's great.
Communities, if given the kind of model of small supports, can make sense of it in their way, which I think is going to be fascinating because it's kind of giving something over. And also in Frome in Somerset, where a small charity has actually taken on supporting a young man and is going to develop a small support arm's length organisation where they're using education and social care money to support him instead of residential college. I think there are so many discussions, one of which was Shona a couple of weeks ago when we were prepping for this meeting. I think there is so much that could be realised by having an open conversation with neighbourhoods and with community groups about, I go back to the phrase, it takes a village to raise a child, and it's building on the notion that this is about communities being offered a set of tools that enables them to take care of their own people. And I think there's some incredibly powerful human messages in that which we haven't got close to realizing, but the small supports organizations that we've been working alongside, and Vicky would say the same because it was very much what she was talking about, it's there very evidently. So I think it's a discussion very, very keen to pursue for small supports, because I think it's there are untold applications.
We talk about the point about neighbourhoods, or Nick talked about neighbourhoods. I think there's a small and quiet piece of research which has also come out of this programme, and it was on the impact, the financial impact on communities of investing in small supports rather than sending that money out of area. And I think obviously what we're really interested in is the individuals and their lives, but the choices that we make about how we spend public money also has an impact. And when we spend public money sending money out of our communities to the big institutional services, that money leaves, that money just goes. But we did a bit of work looking at one of the small supports providers, and we can evidence that every pound that the local authority spent on that small support provider generated £1.64 or £1.69 worth of income into that local community. And I think as people who commission local services and provide local services, I think we have a responsibility for ensuring that we use the money as wisely as we can. And I think that's really important, because we were incredibly fortunate to receive some NHSE funding around this. But one of the things I love about most small support providers, they don't talk about the nature of the people they support. They talk about the nature of support. So this works just as well if you have mental health needs, if you have an acquired brain injury. I'm fascinated by how this could work with people whose dementia is taking them to a place of high support. So we keep referring to a particular group of people, because that's where the funding's directed us. But I think this is about people who have a particular need of support and who want to be supported in a particular way.
The Leeds project did work with people with mental health diagnosis as well as learning disability, so apologies if that didn't come through earlier. And the outcomes were the same for both groups, because it's just what Bill said and Nick said, it's people who deserve to be supported in a different way, and it's not about, you know, the label people have, it's just about what they need on an individual basis to thrive within their own community. Didn't do anything differently. We followed the same rules. So we did the market testing exercise on your tender, and we went through all that, and we still had the same points to score people on that you would under a normal tender. And we still went through the same checks and balances that you would for any other tender you were running. We just didn't develop it into a framework. We kept it as each individual package of support was commissioned on that basis. So each individual had their own commission package of support that was based on what their needs were, what their hopes and aspirations were, and what their outcomes that they wanted to achieve was. So we looked to really streamline it where we could, and by taking that approach, we didn't have to go out to a framework. So we didn't bend the rules, but we just streamlined it exactly where it could. Some processes work for you in local authorities, and some just hinder you. And if you can get around those and look at a different way of doing it, or just a much more straightforward, simplistic way of doing it, that's what I would suggest to people, because the outcomes are much quicker and much better for that.
Yeah. And basically, from a Devon point of view, we went specifically out to the market for an organisation that would work with individual service funds. So although that was done person by person, we originally looked at up to 10 people. So that was a very specific call, really, in terms of doing it differently. But like Steve said, we weren't bending any rules on that. I think the other thing just to say is, if you can't demonstrate effectiveness and you're seeing failure after failure after failure by traditional commissioning methods, then it's time to start something new. And if people are sometimes worried about the market pushing back on you for doing that differently, and particularly if you want to specify small supports, for example, but the argument is that actually empirically we know that what we have offered traditionally doesn't work. So that was the line really we took.
We're at the end of our time. Still need leaving to me to close the session. So thank you very much, everybody, for coming. It has been a compelling session. It's been enjoyable and also very, very refreshing just to see how a very small and simple idea can replicate and duplicate itself in the way that it has been. Thank you again to everybody for being here today and also to the NDTI for supporting the session so well. It's much appreciated. Thank you so much, everyone.